All right, looks like we've got a nice crowd coming in. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to In the Adirondack Library. I'm Liz Bellier, Public Programs Manager here at the Adirondack Experience, the museum on Blue Mountain Lake. And for all those who celebrate, happy Groundhog Day. Puxtawny Phil did see his shadow, which means we've officially been promised 6 more weeks of winter. But honestly, that only makes our program tonight feel even more appropriate. If winter is going to linger on for a bit longer, we might as well embrace being warm and comfortable inside with a good book. And speaking of books, the Adirondack Experience Library is the largest and most comprehensive repository of books, manuscripts, maps, photographs, and government documents related to Adirondack history. Through this series, we invite you inside the library stacks into the people, places, and spirited conversations that have shaped life in the North Country. In the Adirondack Library runs from October through May, with gatherings on the first Monday of each month. You can find upcoming dates and speaker details at theadkx.org. And we are delighted to be continuing our partnership with North Country Public Radio and to welcome back Mitch Teich, station manager at NCPR and host of North Words. Mitch's conversations remind us why the stories of the North Country continue to inspire, amuse, and move us. North Words airs on the fourth Friday of each month from 12 to 1 p.m., and you can always catch up on episodes on the NCPR app. And tonight, we are honored to welcome Giles Blunt, the award-winning author of 6 acclaimed novels featuring detectives John Cardinal and Lise Delorme, work that has been adapted for television and reached audiences around the world. Giles's life and career have taken him from Ontario to England to New York City, where he worked as a writer and screenwriter for series, including Law and Order, before returning to Toronto to write full-time. He is widely admired for his sharp storytelling, his unforgettable characters, and the atmospheric worlds he creates on the page. Giles joins us tonight to discuss his latest novel, Bad Juliet, set 100 years ago in a tuberculosis sanitarium in Saranac Lake. The story follows a young tutor, recently heartbroken, who accepts a position among patients who are seeking rest, healing, and hope. There, he meets an intriguing young woman who is as mysterious as she is compelling. And as he encourages her to write, he becomes drawn into her story, unsure where the truth ends and invention begins. In just a moment, I will turn things over to Giles to talk more about his book. Mitch will then lead tonight's conversation, and we, of course, will be opening up the floor to your questions. Please submit questions through the Q&A feature and check the chat throughout the evening for important links. So for now, settle in and enjoy tonight's conversation. And Giles, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. It's great to be here for a couple of reasons. I'm very fond of the Adirondack experience. We've been there quite a few times and always enjoyed it. And I've bought quite a few books there. And I've also spent time at the Hedges, many summers there for a couple of weeks at a time. Always love it. Um, and as a result of during those visits, I've enjoyed NCPR, listening to it as we drive around from one charming village to another, and losing the station every 5 minutes or so, and then finding the next transmitter to continue listening to Mitch or whoever is broadcasting at the moment. So it's great to be here. Um, and of course, the other reason is because my book is set in the area. Bad Juliet is set in Saranac Lake 100 years ago, as Liz mentioned. And just talk a little bit about how I came to write about it, because I go to the area one year, I think it's 2017. I came across a book at the lodge we were staying at. It was called The Cure Cottages of Saranac Lake. I'd never heard the term cure cottages before, although I was aware that there had a sanitarium of some sort at Saranac Lake. I don't think I knew that it was for tuberculosis at the time, but the book by Philip Giles is very richly illustrated. And I just fell in love with the history of Saranac Lake. It was um, many of you probably know some of it in the late 19th century. Um, they formed a sanitarium for the treatment of tuberculosis, which was at pandemic levels at the time. It was killing 90,000 Americans a year. Um, and it was set up partly philanthropically. Wealthy people got together and put money into this project. And it became not just a treatment center, but a research center. The doctors that worked there, many of them also were very much saw themselves as scientists and were working to find a cure as well as new treatments for tuberculosis. Um, and the amazing thing was that this treatment center became so well known worldwide that it received more applications from people wanting to be treated there, to stay there, to cure there, than it could possibly handle. Um, and the, the amazing thing about Saranac Lake was the locals stepped up and said, we can help out with that. And they had their houses altered in a couple of ways. But the most visual way was they had porches added on, glassed-in porches with windows that you could tilt or swing open in other ways so that the patients could sit out in the fresh air in any weather. And if you're in Blue Mountain Lake, you know what the weather is in Saranac Lake. Uh, they'd be out there in 30 below weather, wrapped up in their blankets, tight in their blankets and lined up on these porches like patients on a Cunard liner. That was an image that was in that initial book that I read, and that was one of the first things that made me think that is interesting because the treatment center captures the era in many ways, but so do Cunard liners, and um, one of them plays a big role in my story. As I got more interested in it, I made repeated visits to Saranac Lake, stayed in a couple of former cure cottage, one former cure cottage, and one um, the reception hospital, which was the place where people went to be initially assessed. They had to already be referred by a doctor, but then they would go to the reception hospital and be assessed by the sanitarium doctors to see what level of treatment they needed. And it was also a sadder function was it was where patients went if they became so ill that a cure cottage could no longer look after them, and they were going to die soon. So they arrived there, and that's if they were going to die in Saranac Lake, that's where they would go. So it's very interesting to stay there. Lots of ghosts. Um, so that was what got me interested in the place, but um, the book also contained, you couldn't tell the story of the cure cottages without talking a lot about who the people were that stayed there. And as I mentioned, they were from all over the world and from all different walks of life. Um, there were many wealthy people came and famous people, entertainers and so on, writers, Somerset Maugham, Robert Louis Stevenson. Um, and because William Morris founded a treatment center for his clients, a separate place for his clients, who were mostly vaudevillians and silent film actors at the time. The place was was full of actors and vaudevillians, which changed the character of the place considerably. Um, Saranac Lake had been up to then a place where you went to go fishing for a couple of months or hunting, more often hunting. And it was famous for its guides and its outfitting stores and so on, and one or two extremely rustic hotels. But because of the success of the sanitarium, um, at a time when no town in the Adirondacks had more than 500 people, Saranac Lake boomed into a town of 7,500, which made it a city compared to anything else south of Montreal at the time. Um, as a result of that, also they had to build all sorts of hotels because people came to visit the patients. Doctors who came had to stay somewhere while they found somewhere to live and so on. And it was already playground sounds too funny, but it was a kind of playground for the rich because rich people came up there to hunt and fish. And of course, the founder of the sanitarium, that was why he set the sanitarium there. It was a place he loved, and he thought, if I'm going to die, I want to die somewhere I love. And that's why the sanitarium came to be there. Um, One of the characters mentioned, as opposed to categories of characters, one of the characters that caught my eye was a woman. It was a real woman. She was a Canadian. She and her husband had to travel to England. The First World War was going on at the time, although the United States was not yet part of it. Um, and she and her husband was going to receive a commission in the British Army, and she was going with him, uh, taking a Cunard liner, as you did at the time. And unfortunately, they got on the liner they took was the Lusitania, which was attacked by the Germans and sunk with, I think it was 1,800 people on board, and I think 1,200 of them died. Um, and the most terrifying thing about that, the Titanic had happened just 3 years previously, so they did a lot of things right. They had enough lifeboats and so on. But if you think about the Titanic, there's so many stories about it. We know so much about it. One of the reasons for that is that it took a little over 2 hours for it to sink. The Lusitania went down in 18 minutes. So it was an extreme trauma for anybody who survived. And it was an unpleasant death for those who didn't, and those who went permanently missing, as did this woman's husband. Um, and as if that wasn't enough tragedy in her life, she no sooner got over the sinking of the Lusitania than she came down with tuberculosis. And for one reason and another, she ended up curing, as they called it, in Saranac Lake. And that the idea of that character just, I thought, wow, that's an interesting character. Um, and I thought I became fascinated with her, and I thought, well, any man at the time would probably be fascinated with her. And indeed, the real woman became kind of a pet favorite because her story was so tragic. And I kept some of that, but I kept from the real character. And like me, my young man character becomes fascinated with her. He's hired to teach her, among other people, about English literature and get them reading great books and talking and thinking about them because most they had to spend day after day, many hours a day, some of them all day in bed, lying down. And the ones who were up and about, even they had to spend hours a day lying down. So there wasn't a lot they could do. Reading and writing was one of them. So it was kind of a natural thing for this guy who had just lost his job as a professor of English literature, which was a brand new pursuit at the time. They hadn't taught English literature previously. And He's also just been jilted. So he heads up to Saranac Lake from New York City, not with tuberculosis, but with a broken heart and injured ego. So he's pretty ripe for falling in love, I think. And indeed he does. But Sarah, the bad Juliet of the title, is in love with someone else. One of those entertainers I mentioned, this entirely fictional person is Jasper Keene, and he's a extremely flamboyant, very successful Broadway playwright, former actor, kind of an actor manager. Those those characters were dying out at the time, being taken over by the Schuberts and another big organization. And so actor managers kind of faded out, but he is still trying to make a go of it that way, and he's been pretty successful. And he takes Paul, my protagonist, under his wing. Paul is he thinks he wants to be a poet. Then he decides that, no, he's probably more of a novelist at heart. But Jasper is very fond of him and wants to help him and does in many ways. But Sarah is in love with um, Jasper, and Paul is falling in love with Sarah. But one of the things he does to cheer her up, because she's very melancholy, he encourages her to write a memoir, not necessarily about the Lusitania, but about whatever she wants to write about. But clearly, the Lusitania is the thing that's on her mind. So maybe she should write about it. So as she writes about it, they also talk about it. And she tells him not just about her experience on the Lusitania, which of course is terrifying, um, but about her very unusual and sometimes difficult, sometimes appalling childhood and young womanhood. Her father was an artist and very peripatetic and um, very narcissistic, I suppose. Although he loved her and tried to look after her, he wasn't very good at it, to say the least. Um, but as she tells Paul more and writes more, um, it becomes harder and harder to believe what she says. Some of the stuff just doesn't ring true, and some of the stuff seems blatantly untrue. Uh, but he's kind of enthralled by her air of tragedy, so he keeps trying to get past that stuff, but um, it becomes more and more difficult to even keep associating with her. Um, because if you can't believe anything that somebody says, it gets pretty difficult to carry on with them. So at its heart, this is first I would say it's what they used to call a Bildungsroman. It's the story of a youngish man becoming a real man. This guy he has a bad attitude to women at the beginning, and he has to find his way around that if he's ever going to know Sarah's love or anybody else's, really. So it's that story. It's also the love story, as I've outlined. Um, but there are other aspects that resonate today. The pandemic aspect, obviously. Um, COVID had still not happened when I started writing the book. I was well into it when it did, and the parallels were obvious. And one of the things that kept me writing this book was in reading about Saranac Lake. They have a wonderful historical society and museums and so on that you must see if you haven't already, and a terrific library with an archive. Um, One of the things that enthralled me about the story, that it was a story about America at its best, Americans at their best. There's all this philanthropy that started the thing off. There's state involvement in financing the hospital, building the hospitals, and in overseeing the care that the the local people in those cure cottages did. There was nothing amateur about it. They had three different health agencies that oversaw their care of the patients. And the patients were treated by doctors who worked at the sanitarium and often were researchers themselves. And they did everything they could to not just look after the patients, but to keep them happy because the length of time, this was a disease that you could be there for, nobody stayed for less than 3 months. The common stay would be 3 years. And some people stayed for 10. One woman stayed for 15 years. Um, you know, that's a long time. It's a long time to essentially do nothing because they were pulled out of their daily lives completely. If a diagnosis of tuberculosis meant, boom, you lost your job. You lose friends because it was highly infectious and nobody wants to be around an infectious disease like tuberculosis. And many people lost their spouses very quickly sometimes. So there was a lot of heartbreak. And one of the fascinating things for me was that one of the rules in Saranac Lake, stemming from the sanitarium, but it spread everywhere, was good cheer was next to sunshine and fresh air. A cheerful attitude was the most crucial um, thing to becoming cured. That's traveled down to us today with cancer. Of course, they have a similar attitude there. But so you would think that among those archives, there would be a lot of broken-hearted letters and so on, and records of unpleasant divorces and so on. And I found nothing. And I think that was because they were so successful in maintaining and encouraging this cheerful attitude that the people that wrote about their time at Saranac Lake just said how wonderful it was. They were so happy there. The people were so kind, so generous, so cheerful, uh, looking after them. So I wanted to bring that in too, and it causes Paul some problems because he finds it a little hard to believe in all this good cheer. It's what he's just been through, and obviously what Sarah has been through and is going through. And I think that's pretty much all I have to tell you. I'd like to talk about one other thing, and it's a more technical thing. And sometimes my editor would say, "Don't get technical, don't get technical." But that's what, for me anyway, and I think for a lot of the writers I know, that's what's fascinating. That's what keeps you going. You think, oh, this is going to be difficult. This is going to be a challenge. How do I make this mysterious person who can't be believed? How do I make her still somebody you want to know more about, and so on? And or this callow young man, how do I um, get you to maintain any interest in him since he's not a very nice guy at the beginning. He's not awful, but he's not very admirable at the beginning. And one of the ways I deal with that is the book is narrated by Paul many years later, about 40 years later. He's narrating it from 1954 when he decides to write his memoir about back when he was 22 and about this crucible he lived through with these other characters there. So that interested me in terms of I hadn't done a full-length first-person narration before, and it became doubly interesting for me. And from what I'm hearing from readers for readers is that, as I mentioned, Sarah is encouraged to write a memoir and to talk about her experiences. So there's a second narrator, but I don't switch into, yeah, I could just say, okay, memoir, give a date and so on and have it be in her voice. But I thought that would be too jarring. And I wanted it to be, I really wanted to draw you in and the way Paul is drawn into to her stories. So I was trying to make those narrative shifts as seamless as possible. It was a big challenge. I think it works. What I'm hearing from readers is that it works. So I hope you'll try it and agree that it does. Um, but if it's not a medical book, And it's not, although it's set 100 years ago, I don't feel like it's a period piece, but it's not genre historical book. It ain't a bodice ripper. It's pretty serious, but with some humor, and I hope you will find it to your taste. Oh, should I do a 3-minute reading?
It'd be great to have give people just a little bit of a for your prose and
Okay, it's a very, very short reading. I may disappear for a second because I'm going to call it up on my screen so that I'm not looking off screen the whole time. There we go. Okay. Um, as I mentioned, Paul has lost his job as a adjunct professor, and now he's having dinner at the invitation of the fellow who had recommended him for that job, a former professor of his, and now he's asked him to dinner to tell him about something else. Um, so here they are at this rather casual pub for the time. Have you ever heard, he asked me, of a place called Saranac Lake? Of course, the sanitarium is famous. Simon nodded. World famous. A sudden fear gripped me. Wait a minute, you're not saying you... No, 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 I'm not sick. God forbid. He rapped smartly on the wooden tabletop to ward off infection. I have a friend up there, a physician named Alex Tissot, an old pal from Hopkins. He works at the sanitarium. It's funny in a way. The North Country is a mighty come down for him. He had a thriving practice on Park Avenue, treating wealthy neurasthenics, which I gather is the medical equivalent of striking oil. Anyway, one day he received the news that he had tuberculosis. But can you imagine? It's like getting a death sentence. It is a death sentence. Dire indeed. He got a second opinion from a tuberculosis expert who wrote out a referral right then and there. He was admitted to the sanitarium, got treated, and much to his own surprise, got well. He was so taken with what he called, still calls, the passion and expertise of the place that he elected to stay, folded up his New York practice for good, and has been up there ever since, treating patients and doing more power to him. Seems a grim line of work, though. One has to think not. Otherwise, a man of Tissot's caliber would never stay. I don't hear from him all that often, but the last time I did, he was highly enthusiastic about a new program he was developing for the patients. I thought the treatment consisted entirely of bed rest. Largely, not entirely. Tissot told me that one of the biggest problems they face is patient apathy. It's not much of a life lying in bed month after month, and it must begin to seem pointless after a while. To fight this malaise, he's developed a whole department devoted to patient enrichment, which is where you come in. They have various people teaching the patients languages, others teaching them practical skills from shorthand to telegraph operation to bookbinding, and they're expanding further still into art history and English literature. And he's hiring lecturers? Lecturers, no. Tutors. The patients are mostly immobile, or practically so, and the teacher must go to the pupil, make his rounds like the doctors. It pays decently considering meals and housing are covered. Anyway, he needs an English literature teacher, and the job is probably yours if you want it. First, I said, thank you. Really, Simon, it's good of you to think of me, especially not at all. First person I thought of. Thank you. But you'll forgive me if I speak plainly? Of course. You're suggesting I consider moving up into the Adirondack Mountains and live in what is essentially a leper colony. He considered this a moment, swirling his brandy. He drank the last of it and set his glass down on the table. Yes, he said, I suppose I am. And that's it. There we go.
Well, first to say, this is a book that that had me excited. You've done a wonderful job of placing me and your readers in that place and creating some really characters. So, bravo for that. Um, I wanted to start asking you. I mean that this is there's essentially inside a memoir. That we're getting Giles' memoir, and then in his telling, we're Sarah's memoir as well. The the unreliable narrator has been tossed out in discussions of, um, but it's we're dealing with somebody who is essentially trying to remember something that happened uh, 30 or 40 before. And one of the things that he's telling is someone else's memoir, which might be, well, if you will. Um, as the novelist, how much do you believe it's amazing to think of the kind of missions you had to do to craft both of these stories inside each other, if you
Well, it certainly took a great deal of thought. The I the initial narrator, Paul himself, at the age of whatever he is later, late 60s, I guess. Um, uh, he's I think slightly melancholy and certainly nostalgic for the time and all that tone came easily. It just seemed natural to me. Um, it was trickier with Sarah, and at first I didn't know how to do it. I mean, I didn't know when I started writing it that she was going to do a memoir. That just it seemed like a good idea to get as a way to get her talking and thinking about things that she didn't really want to talk about. She did really, and yet didn't, because a lot of the stuff she remembers is pretty upsetting in many different ways. Um, but I didn't want to switch directly into her voice and have her hedge and hem and haw and have her directly lying to the reader. So I tried to figure out a way to smooth that over, and I think it works. Basically, he says it's 40 years later. He says, "Look, I don't have her memoir at hand for reasons I'll tell you about later, but I remember a lot of it very, very clearly." And so this is a combination of what she said and what she wrote. And occasionally he'll say what she wrote, but mostly it's just as if she's talking. And it seemed, to my surprise, it seemed to flow very well that way, better than I think it would have had I switched to a more documentary approach.
we're getting questions already, and one of them was, I'm told that my microphone was cutting out, and hopefully I
Yeah,
sound better now.
you do.
Okay, good. I switched from the real radio microphone to the microphone on my laptop. Go
Uh,
figure.
there you go. Yeah, who knows?
Um, as was mentioned in your introduction, you had written a number of crime novels before this, and how was your process for writing this different than I know as we were preparing for this interview, one of the things that you said you were concerned about was that in some ways this book plays out more as a mystery than your crime novels because we don't know what's going to happen. How is the writing process different in this case than what you had written in the past?
Well, I certainly wasn't trying to sort of, reach into the mystery toolbox and use it. It's just the way the story turned out. It was because she wants to talk, but is also trying to hide things. Um, it just has a kind of natural pull forward. You know that, I mean, she's every when she speaks, she sounds absolutely truthful. There's no reason to suspect. It's just things happen later on, that cause you to question it, and that's very compelling. It pulls you forward. At the same time, uh, things come up. There are sudden revelations, turns of events that reveal things um, that she didn't really want revealed, and that cause big setbacks and so on. Um, so I think it's more it's like a mystery in the sense that it's difficult to talk about without spoiling it because there are surprises in the development of the story, and those, of course, they're kind of the best parts, I think, or the parts you remember. And I don't want to spoil them by saying what they are. So in a way, it's even harder to talk about than my mystery novels were.
Well, let's talk about something that might be easier to talk about, and that is
Mm.
a question that Anthony asks. He writes, where today many people have health insurance to pay for prevailing or available health care. Who paid for this type of health care in Saranac Lake at these facilities and cottages? Was it only available to those that could afford it, or was there care for all who needed it?
It was the sanitarium itself, the Adirondack Sanitarium, the Trudeau Sanitarium, as it was later called, was started as a philanthropic thing. It was to be for people who could not afford healthcare elsewhere, treatment elsewhere. Um, so that meant that the people that didn't get into the place, the sanitarium, um, they were the ones that they were better off, and they could afford care at the cure cottages. So that's why you got entertainers and people staying at these local people's homes, which had turned into mini clinics. Of course, the dollar value is very, very different. So, a a course might cost you a dollar a session or something to have the an English professor teach you about English literature.
A little different than say college tuition these days.
Yeah, a little. Yeah, yeah.
Eric writes in with a question and just says, please comment further on your observation that the time of your book was when we as a people were in a better place, especially in contrast to where we are today.
Well, I lived in the United States for 22 years, my entire 30s and 40s. So I have a lot of affection for people in the United States, for the country itself, for its history uh, in many ways. So when I think about what's happening in the United States, I think about my friends down there and the people I used to work with and think, my God, all these lovely people, and they have to live with this. It was a time, um, it was a time of great inequality, but it was changing. Theodore Roosevelt was very progressive. He was a Republican, of course, and a colonialist in many ways, but he was very, very progressive. He was against the trusts, as they were called at the time, and that got him thrown out of the Republican Party, really. Um, and there was a great zeal for reform, both from religious people like the Quakers and so on, but also because of recent scientific advantages. Science was revered, was becoming more revered at the time because they'd discovered germ theory. They had discovered what caused tuberculosis, which had been a great mystery for hundreds of years. Uh, so people really admired these doctors, and they were fascinated by developments and in treatment, but also about other things. Radio was coming along at the time, telegraphy and so on, which radio telegraph had played. That's one of the reasons not everybody died on the Titanic was because they were able to radio ships and a lot of them got picked up. So there was a great reverence for science at the time. And when um, the researchers said the best treatment is fresh air. Well, there was this big movement to change the workplaces and living quarters for people to air out the cities. And when they said, you know what, if you can, you should have your classrooms outside. And so all over North America, there's pictures of kids sitting outside with their big coats on and stuff to be out in the fresh air. Which I mentioned only to point out how much people revered what scientists said. They didn't say, ah, what do they know? You know. Um, so it's very different that way. And also the spirit. It's wonderful to read about Saranac Lake at the time that I mean well, just this you know, how are we going to entertain them? How are we going to educate them? How do we make them more able to get back into society after years away? And they built their famous ice palace every summer to entertain them. They all of these entertainers, of course, had contacts in the entertainment world. They called in favors from very famous people to put on plays. They had two theaters. And it was almost like when they like New Haven is for Broadway shows now. It was almost like that. Very famous people would perform there for them. Just so all these people putting just the local ordinary people, um, the nurses who worked for very little money and in you know um, slightly scary circumstances. It's just wonderful how everybody came together. I believe I didn't see a trace of it in all the reading I did of Saranac Lake. I believe there were a couple of years later in the flu epidemic, there were people who refused to wear masks and so on. But I didn't come across any of that in terms of tuberculosis. Everybody, they listened to the doctors and said, oh, you've got to keep your place super clean. You've got to keep it aired out and you should spend as much time in the sun as you can. And it's just a real example of, I should make one more point on that. They came together so well that I think a lot of you probably know that tuberculosis was eventually wiped out through antibiotics. Streptomycin was discovered in 46, I think, and it was put into treatments in 1948. And that reduced the incidence by it shortened the course of the disease by quite a bit. And then in the early 50s, they found another drug that between the two of them that actually cured it, which was amazing. But before that, before streptomycin was discovered, they had reduced the incidence by 80%. And that was just by public health, which had basically existed much before this, through public health measures, public works, urban renewal, and people looking out for each other. So it's a heartening story in many ways, and it's pretty hard to read about it and not kind of love Saranac Lake, even if you don't live there.
Well, this is really the opposite of the not in my backyard attitude, NIMBY.
Totally,
And
totally.
I couldn't help but think of the parallel. I mean, it reminds me in many ways of, the story of Gander, Newfoundland,
Mm,
on 9/11 when, all
yes,
these flights were stranded, trying to return to the United States, and the
yeah,
people of Gander opened their homes in a similar way.
yeah, yeah. Yes, it's a story that makes you think, oh, yes, there are some good sides to human nature. And of course, there was a play, a musical made of that Gander experience, which is run on Broadway and elsewhere. And of course, massive hit in Canada because Canadians like nothing better than to be told how sweet natured they are. But so do Americans. And I will say, I said as soon as I saw it that Americans would have done exactly the same thing. If a Canadian flight had to land under perilous circumstances, I don't know about now,
Yeah.
but up to about a year ago, I would say, of course, Americans would be the same. I mean, we've been friendly to each other for a long, long time, and it's just basic human nature to to step up in an emergency when somebody obviously needs help that you obviously can give.
How did your work writing for television inform the novelist that you became?
Hmm. Um, well, it had an effect on crime novels, certainly. Um, in fact, I doubt if I'd read more than two or three crime novels before I started working. I got a job writing for TV, and then I read about a dozen crime novels all at once to sort of get the hang of it. And but it was more through writing freelance movie scripts, which are m more similar to novels than a TV show. Just the structure, three-act structure, and so on. That strongly. That's certainly the skeleton of all my crime books. And moving away from crime, it's it's been very interesting and a big adjustment to not have that same structure. You start the book, there's no dead body there. There's nothing to investigate. You have to make it all up. I find it much more intimidating, actually. But so it's kind of more of an adventure as well.
How well did you know how the story would turn out when you set out to write it in the first place?
Oh, I really didn't. I I really didn't. I was just so fascinated with the characters. I wanted to see them do more. I mean, again, it's one of those things I can't really say about. I had another idea of how to write the story, but if I told you about it, it would spoil the story that I have written. Uh, It's just a crime novel. Particularly, I was writing police procedurals. The John Cardinal books are six books that are police procedurals, and so there's a lot of stuff that's given. It's just a given, and it's just a question of, well, how am I going to do that this time, or how I'm going to do it so it's not like how so and so did it, and so on. But this, it's like, well, how many tuberculosis novels have you? I mean, there's the Magic Mountain. And that's about it. And there's a couple of movies, but that's about it. It was really the fact that these local people had taken them in. That was what kept me fascinated. And how to make a story out of that. It's it's hard to explain because it isn't. I can't say, well, 100 pages in, you have to do something like this, and halfway through, you got to do something. There is none of that.
Yeah.
Yet this the story. Um, and the characters have to develop the way they're going to develop.
And that is why it is not a bodice ripper.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Um, the reason I asked the question about your career writing for television was that when we had our planning meeting for this discussion, you mentioned that you had a collection of photos of Saranac Lake from this period,
Yeah.
but you didn't want to show them during this event because you wanted people to create their own images in
Yeah.
their mind. And of course, you don't have that luxury when you're writing for TV because there's the image that they're given. Um,
Right.
and at some level, it must be somewhat gratifying as a novelist to kind of set these people into motion, knowing that everybody might have a different image of Paul
Yeah.
or Sarah or the village of Saranac Lake.
Absolutely. And it's kind of, I mean, I think of it as the most interactive form of entertainment there is. I mean, it's just because, I think Coleridge said it a long time ago, a poem is half created by the reader. And it's absolutely true. Well, when I say that this lovely young woman is, lying in a cure chair on a porch, well, how you see it and how someone else sees it are going to be totally different. Very different from one another, depending on how much you know about that stuff or what kind of movies you've seen. And the idea that you can engage people with words it's really kind of thrilling. I mean, T.S. Eliot had a clunky, but it hasn't really been improved on a term for it. He said, the writer has an experience and an idea of what he wants to do with it, and he creates this object, and that object is between you, the reader, and him, and then the reader receives a certain amount from that object, and then half creates what they get. But the two things, the end result, are very different. And I don't know, it's just such a challenge. And when you hear from people, as I've been hearing on this book, that they really love it or that they couldn't put it down and they found it fascinating and informative and all that stuff. It's just great. It feels great.
You mentioned that the character of Sarah is in part based on this real woman, the Canadian, who was on the Lusitania at the time
Mm.
it was torpedoed and found herself with tuberculosis in Saranac Lake. Where did you turn to learn the details of the Lusitania's sinking? Because without giving too much away, there are some really vivid images that we get from reading your novel.
Yeah. Well, I read the two big fat books. Probably have them right here. Eric Larson's Deadweight and Diane Preston's Lusitania. They're both terrific accounts of it, but both of them and all the other accounts are based on a very thin book. It's about 80 pages that's written by a guy who was on the Lusitania and survived, obviously. And a rare book dealer, and he had a first class cabin, and he recounts it in quite a lot of detail. And it's all very concrete. And he doesn't have to say it's horrifying. It just is. Like, what, 7 minutes later, and this is happening, or none of the lifeboats are working, or whatever. Um, that was a great resource with it. It's just a terrifying story.
Well, and that it all happened within the span of 18 minutes makes it
Yeah.
all the more terrifying.
Yeah, yeah. And then you wake up, you set off on a sunny day and then you wake up on a fishing wharf in Ireland.
Well, and that's an interesting detail that I had not realized until I read Bad Juliet that the rules of engagement in those days meant that the British Navy couldn't come to the rescue of the Lusitania.
Well, they were ordered not to, or to come directly to the aid of any ship that was attacked, whether it was a hospital ship or a civilian ship or a merchant ship, because the U-boats, they hung around precisely. I mean, the great thing was to have it sink slowly and have lots of people show up to help them and then sink them too. And that happened with a couple of hospital ships in the First World War. Disgusting. There was a Canadian one called the Landovery Castle, ship full of nurses. They sank it and then fired at the people in the water.
Ah,
That's not the way it's supposed to go. You're supposed to,
no,
yeah.
no.
Anyway, yeah, pretty horrible. Yeah, they so that the people who might have military people who wanted to go and rescue them weren't allowed to do it because then you lose two ships and more people. Horrible, horrible thing. But again, you have people, all these fishermen who rowed out there and or sailed out there and brought people to shore and looked after them.
Wow. We have another question that one of our attendees asks. Are there any patients, and I'm not sure whether you know this, but are there any patients of TB cottages still living? Or if not, do you know of any recordings of people being interviewed about their experiences? And did you tap into any of
Full
those when you
recording.
wrote the book?
I think there are. I don't know if there are recordings of there are definitely recordings of tuberculosis patients. There's a DVD available in Saranac Lake, and you probably online too, that has the memories of people. I listened to that very early on, so I can't remember if they were people who were actually there. I think they were. And there's a book. Um, there's a book that is just the recollections of people who were there. As I say, it was most of them saying how wonderful it was.
Yeah.
Uh, it was scary at first, but then it was wonderful. One of the great resources was here in Canada. We have the CBC, and I got recordings from them. They had but this was in the 30s. They had interviewed some survivors of the Lusitania. They interviewed some crew members
Ah,
from the Lusitania. That was pretty fascinating.
yeah, yeah. How did you come to find Blue Mountain Lake in the first place?
That's a very good question. I think my wife and I had said, the Canadian thing is to have a cottage. Um, Now they've become unaffordable for most people. And I said, I've always wanted to have a cottage. Why don't we try to find a place cottage-like that we could go to every year? So you have that feeling of, I'm back here, this place where I'm just here to relax and enjoy the area. And I mentioned that I had spent just a couple of days in the Adirondacks at Long Lake many, many years ago in around 1990. And I thought it was just absolutely beautiful, and I felt really at home there. So Jana looked into it, and we wanted to find an all-inclusive place, and that narrowed it down. And we ended up going to the Hedges and fell in love with the place. And we've been back every year except this past year, ever since. Oh, and we had to miss a year or two because of COVID, because the border kept closing and opening, closing and opening. But
It
yeah,
must have been.
just immediately, oh wow, this is good. We want to stay here forever. My favorite thing in the world is to sit on the veranda by Blue Mountain Lake during a huge storm, reading a book.
It must have been eerie to be writing this book and then have a global pandemic set in.
Uh, yeah, yeah, it was. It was. Yeah, it was the discord between the two different experiences was pretty extreme. Although in Toronto there wasn't there were people who thought Trudeau was a tyrant because he wanted people to wear masks and so on, saying ugly things and even harassing doctors and nurses as they went to work.
Hmm.
Um, but they were very, very few here. Very, very vocal, but very, very few. So we were lucky that way. I mean, the people that I used to do my work at a place called the Writers Center, and nobody there had a problem with any of that. But we wanted to keep the place open, so of course you got to wear a mask.
It's funny you said Trudeau, and I was momentarily confused about which Trudeau we were talking about.
I avoid using the term Trudeau Sanitarium throughout the book because for my Canadian readers, they would go, "What?" They just wouldn't. I believe they are very distantly related. I think they have a common ancestor in the 17th century or something, but I don't think the two families know each other at all.
Uh, Kathy writes in, and I have to share it for the way it came in because it tickles me in the Q&A. She wrote that in the American Visionary Art Museum in Baltimore, there's a permanent, and then her first message was cut off, and so I was anxiously awaiting what it was, and she continues by saying a permanent exhibit of a model of the Lusitania made of 193,000 toothpicks.
I guess somebody
Which
had to do it.
which I am eager. I am going to, as soon as we're done here, seek out a picture of that because it sounds
Wow. I'm surprised I
remarkable.
haven't heard of it. That's funny. I did look into models and so on. Any model that was big enough to be interesting and have enough detail was very expensive. I ended up not getting, but I would have loved to have had one sitting on my desk.
Imagine putting one together while sitting on the veranda in Blue Mountain Lake.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, those ships in themselves were amazing. I mean, they're just amazing. You think of the grandest hotel you've ever stayed in. They were like that, even for everybody except third class. I mean, they were just amazing places to be and sort of wonders of technology that they could go 21 knots. This, if you could drive a hotel at 21 knots across the North Atlantic, that's pretty amazing.
Kimberly writes in to say that she's seen this model and says, "What a museum! Visit it if you get the chance."
Yeah.
And yes, well, and I have relatives in Maryland, so the next time I'm back in the Baltimore area,
Mm.
I will definitely do that. Um, I'm not seeing any additional questions. We'll give people another minute or two while I ask you this question. I gather you are something of a musician, is that right?
I play guitar and piano and sing with we rather rudely call ourselves a geezer band. I, of course, am not a geezer. They are,
No,
but
no, not at all.
no. And we play classic rock, British Invasion stuff, Beatles, Badfinger, all the stuff from the 60s and 70s and 80s too.
I
But
wondered if there, I was just going to ask if there
basically
was a,
anything after the White Album, I think of as new music.
we all have those. Now we have there's a link for the toothpick model, so I will share
Okay.
this in the chat. I was just going to ask if there was a playlist, whether you listen to music when you write.
I do, or I did. I'm not anymore at the moment. But oh, I have for years. I have hundreds and hundreds of soundtrack recordings from movie soundtracks. I started doing it because when I first started writing in New York, I had my desk was a hollow core door on top of two metal filing cabinets, and my writing implement was this electric Smith Corona, but not the
Yeah.
golf ball kind. So it would slap the platen and the paper with enormous force, and it was so loud. I got headphones and started listening to it was electronic music at first, and then when I couldn't stand that anymore, I started getting into you know soundtracks and so on. And yeah, I've used them a lot. I had uh, just you kind of try to find something that is kind of captures the mood that you want. The problem is that in a whole soundtrack, there might be only two cuts that are of that mood.
Hmm.
So so it ends up probably being more of a distraction than a help.
So nothing you would recommend that people listen to while they read this.
No, 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 not at all. Again, I want them to hear the sounds as they're evoked in the story.
Uh, well, Giles Blunt, I will say it again. This is a book that stays with you, and we're so fortunate to have gotten to spend the hour with you.
I'm delighted to have been here, and I really appreciate being invited.
And let me turn things back over to Liz Bellier at the Adirondack Experience.
All right.
Thanks very much. Thank you to everyone who joined us this evening, and we extend our sincere thanks to Mitch and Giles for such a engaging and thoughtful conversation. And as we look ahead, we invite you to join us again on Monday, March 2nd, when we welcome author Jennifer Denny to discuss her work of fiction, Calculated Risk. And just before we go, if the winter doldrums has you eager for reasons to get out of the house, February does offer some wonderful opportunities to connect with the museum in person. So this Thursday, February 5th, we are back with our popular Taps and Trivia series where we partner with local bars and restaurants throughout the North Country for Adirondack themed trivia nights. So we will be at the Garrison in Lake George this Thursday, 6 to 8 p.m. It's free to play. You may want to reserve a table ahead of time. And we are not slowing down. On February 17th, our Zoom series with Albany Public Library returns with a hybrid event. So those near Albany can attend in person at the Washington Avenue branch to hear educator Adam Stewart share his Adirondack adventures with Brother Yusuf, a remarkable figure whose stories continue to inspire curiosity and admiration. So February is a busy month for us in the best possible way, so we encourage you to visit the80kx.org for a full schedule. On behalf of all of us at the Adirondack Experience, I'm Liz Bellier. Thank you for spending your evening with us. From our cozy corner of the Adirondacks to your home, near or far, We hope you stay warm, safe, and well. Until next time. Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Liz. Thanks, Mitch. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.